The programs were cream-colored with a little fern printed in the corner. My sister picked them. She fought me about the fern for 2 weeks. I'm telling you about the fern first because 11 people wrote on the back of those programs that afternoon, in pen, standing up. And I have all 11 of them in a folder in my house. And I only ever used 9. My father hit me at 3:04 on a Saturday in October in front of 81 people. Not a shove, not a grab. An open hand across the left side of my face, hard enough that I heard it before I felt it, which is a thing I did not know was possible. The room made a sound. That's the part nobody warns you about. 81 people make a specific sound when something happens that they all understand at once, and it isn't a gasp. It's lower than that. It's the sound of everybody's breath stopping in the same half second. And then it was very, very quiet. My husband had been standing about 9 feet away. His name is Wes, and he has been on an ambulance for 19 years. And he did not shout, and he did not touch my father. He walked over. And he crouched down a little so his eyes were level with mine, and he said, "Roz, look at me. Can you hear me okay?" "Wes, can you open your jaw all the way for me?" I opened my jaw. "Any ringing? Left side?" "A little." He nodded once, and then he stood up and he turned to a room full of people in their good clothes, and he said in exactly the same voice, "Does anybody here have a pen?" 11 people did. They wrote what they saw on the back of the programs, standing at their chairs with the fern on the other side. I used 9 of them. The 10th one belonged to my father's best friend of 40 years. And the 11th one belonged to my sister, who spent the next 4 months telling everyone this was my fault with that piece of paper in her purse the entire time. Before I tell you what my sister wrote, and what it cost a 68-year-old man named Cal to hand me his, tell me what time it is where you are, and what town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. I'm a certified general appraiser, 11 years, Erie County, Pennsylvania. People hear the word appraiser and they think of the man on television who tells you your grandmother's vase is worth $9,000. Here's the actual job. 19 times out of 20, I am sitting at somebody's kitchen table. Usually a woman. Usually somewhere between 65 and 85. Usually there has been a death, or there's about to be a move, or the money has to come from the house because there isn't anywhere else for it to come from. And I have walked through her house with a clipboard, and I have measured her rooms, and I have gone in the basement with a flashlight and looked at the sill plate. And now I am sitting across from her with a number. And the number is almost always smaller than the life she had in it. There's a rhythm to it. It goes the same way every time. You say the number, she says, "Are you sure?" And you say, "Yes, ma'am." And then she tells you about the kitchen. There's always a kitchen. Her husband put that floor in himself in 1979, and it took him 3 weekends, and he bled on it. The number does not know that. The number cannot know that. And she knows the number can't know it, and she tells you anyway. Because she has to say it out loud to somebody, and you happen to be the person at the table. And then she says, "So it's really only that." And you say, "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry." And you do not change it. That's the whole job. That is the entire job, and anybody who tells you different is selling something. At the end of every report, there's a page called the certification. It's the boring page. Nobody reads it. It says, "I personally inspected the property. These are my conclusions. I have no undisclosed interest. I performed this assignment without bias." And then your name, your license number, and your signature. Not the firm's, not the bank's, yours. The software makes a little sound when you attach it, a soft 2-note chime, like a doorbell somewhere else in a house. 11 years, probably 2,000 reports. I have heard that chime 2,000 times, and I have never once gotten used to it. Remember it. It comes back at the end of this. My father is Roslyn Ferrell. He's 66. He restores buildings, not flips, restores. He bought the Guarantee Building on State Street in 1991 when it had pigeons living on the 4th floor, and it is a hotel now. And there is a photograph of it in his office, and it is the only thing on his walls. Not his kids, not his wife, that building. He clicks a pen when he's thinking, 3 times, always 3. I want to tell you something about him that isn't a criticism or none of the rest of this works. My father is the reason anything on the east side of that city is still standing. He fought the county for 11 years over a block that everybody else wanted flattened. He was right. There's a coffee shop in it now, and a dentist, and 11 apartments. And none of it exists without a stubborn man who would not go away. He is not a small person. That's the problem. Small people are easy. I was 12, he used to take me on Saturdays. There was a house on Poplar Street. Rear porch collapsed, water coming through the roof into the 2nd floor. Somebody's dead grandmother's furniture still in it. He stood me in the front room and he said, "Tell me what you see." "It's falling down." "That's what it is. I didn't ask you what it is." He crouched down. He always crouched down. That's where Wes gets it, isn't that funny? And he said, "Tell me what it's worth if we're right." And I was 12, and I had no idea, and I said a number I made up out of nothing. Some huge number. And my father's whole face opened up. "There she is," he said. I want you to understand what that felt like. I would have said any number in the world to see that face again. He was not teaching me to lie. I need to be fair to him about this, because it took me 20 years to work out. He was teaching me vision. The actual, valuable, rare thing he had. The thing that saved a block of that city. He was teaching me to see what a wreck could become. He just never taught me the other half. He never once said, "And then you go home and you write down what it is." 19 years later, I picked a profession where saying the bigger number is a felony. I have never been able to decide whether that was rebellion or repair. So that's the 12-year-old in the front room. And that's the woman standing in a dress at 4 minutes past 3, being asked for a number one more time. My Aunt Dee died in 2019, my father's sister. She had 140 feet of frontage on the bay end of a street that used to be a boatworks, and she left it half to my father and half to me. For 4 years, that was a piece of weeds with a chain across it, and nobody thought about it. Then the city moved the Bayfront redevelopment line 2 blocks east, and suddenly those 140 feet were the difference between a $96 million project and no project at all. Presque Point, hotel, 41 apartments, a marina building, and a public dock the city wanted badly enough to put money in. It was going to be the last thing my father ever built. He was 66. He said that out loud more than once, at more than one dinner. The last thing I build. 3 weeks before the wedding, he came to my house on a Tuesday with a folder. He made coffee in my kitchen like it was his kitchen, which I have never minded and still don't. "It's an ownership confirmation," he said, "housekeeping. The bank wants every name on paper." I read it. I want to be honest, I read it because I read everything, not because I suspected him. It's a reflex like a nurse looking at your hands. Page 3, second paragraph, in with the language about the undersigned's undivided interest, was a consent to encumber. Not confirm ownership, pledge it. My half of Aunt Dee's 140 feet as collateral on a $96 million construction loan. I put it down and I said, "Dad, this isn't a confirmation." He clicked the pen 3 times. "It's the same thing at the end of the road." "It's not the same thing at the beginning of the road, and I'm at the beginning of the road." Roz. If the project stalls at month 14, the bank comes for the land. Both halves. Aunt Dee's land. And my father said something I didn't understand at the time, and understand completely now. It's not going to stall. Not, it might not. Not, here's the contingency. It's not going to stall. That's not a projection. That's a man who has already decided what the future is, and who genuinely believes that anybody who writes down a different possibility is being disloyal to it. I said no. He put the folder back in his bag and he said, "You'll think about it." And he hugged me at the door. And he meant that too. Both things at once. That's the part nobody believes. 8 months before any of this, I'd done a job for a bank that was looking at the Boatworks building. The big brick one, the anchor of the whole site. Straightforward assignment. As-is value, and an as-completed value assuming the renovation. As completed, I put it at $4.1 million. That number had 7 risk disclosures hanging off it. The biggest one was environmental. It's a former Boatworks. There were solvents on that site for 60 years. And my report said, in plain language, that a Phase 2 assessment was required, and that remediation was not included in the renovation budget I'd been given. I attached my certification. The chime. 9 days before the wedding, a junior analyst at my father's company sent me a financing package by mistake. Wrong Ferrell in the address book. There are 3 of us. I opened it because it had my name on it. My report was in it. Same cover, same photographs, same license number. As completed value, $6.3 million. The environmental language was gone. Not softened, gone. The Phase 2 requirement, the remediation carve-out, the whole paragraph. 4 more of my 7 disclosures had been either deleted or rewritten into something that meant approximately nothing, and the certification page was still attached. My name, my license number, my signature, lifted off the original as an image file. I sat in my living room with 2 documents on my coffee table. And I want to tell you what my first thought was, because I've never said it out loud, and it is the single worst thing in this story. My first thought was, 6.3 is defensible. For about 4 seconds, and I have counted it out since, it was about 4 seconds, I looked at that number and my brain did the thing my father taught it to do in a front room on Poplar Street in 2003. I saw the argument for it. I saw how you'd get there. I saw what it could become. 4 seconds. I'm 34 years old, and I have never been more frightened of anything than I was of those 4 seconds. I called him. Dad, somebody changed my report. A pause. Changed it how? Not what, not who. Changed it how? 6.3, environmental's gone. That's the current package. That reflects where the project actually is now.
It reflects where the project is with my signature on it. Roz, did you know? And my father said, "You're being dramatic about a version number." A version number. Take my certification off it. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works. It's my license. Take it off. And then he said the sentence I have thought about more than any other sentence in my life. Family businesses last because people know which questions aren't necessary. I hung up on my father for the first time in 34 years. 12 days later, he hit me. 81 people, 2 o'clock, at a place out on the peninsula with windows on 3 sides because Wes wanted water. Wes Tarrant is 41, 19 years on an ambulance, the last 6 as a supervisor. He is the calmest person I have ever met, and it is not a personality. It's a callus.
He carries trauma shears in his pocket, off duty, at the grocery store. He had them on him in a rented suit at his own wedding, which I did not know until later, and which I now find so unbearably him that I can't talk about it for long. My father came and found me 20 minutes before. He looked wonderful. He is a handsome man, and he knew what that day was. He had my grandfather's cufflinks on. "You look like your aunt," he said, and I said thank you, because I did. And because it was the kindest thing he'd said to me in 3 weeks. Then, closing's Tuesday at 10. Dad, 1 page, Roz. You can be angry at me Wednesday. Be angry at me for a year. Sign the page. No. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard something reasonable. He adjusted the cufflinks. He said, "All right," and he walked away. And I genuinely thought, I want you to hear how stupid this is. I genuinely thought, okay, that went fine. We'd done the vows. We had not done the license yet. There's a part where the officiant invites people to say something, which I had specifically asked her to keep short, and my father stood up. Everybody assumed a toast. He's a good speaker. He's been a good speaker at 400 rubber chicken dinners in that county. He said, "I want to say one thing to my daughter." And then he said, in front of 81 people, "Tuesday morning, are you going to do the right thing by this family?" I have replayed that a lot. He did it in the room on purpose. He had watched me be polite my entire life. He was spending the room, 81 people, my dress, Wes's mother, as leverage. It was the biggest asset he had, and he spent it. And I said into a microphone in front of everybody, "No, Dad." He crossed the floor in about 4 steps. I did not see the hand. I want that on the record because people always ask. I didn't see it. I heard it. And then the left side of my face was hot. And then I was looking at the window. And then 81 people made that sound. Wes did not run. That's the thing about him. 19 years of walking into somebody's worst minute has taken the run out of him entirely. He came over at a normal pace. He crouched. He asked me if I could hear him. He asked me to open my jaw. He asked about ringing on the left side. He put 2 fingers under my chin and turned my face an inch toward the window light and looked at my eye. And then he let go. And then he stood up and asked the room for a pen. He said this. I know it exactly because 4 different people wrote it down. "I'm sorry to do this here. If you saw what just happened, I'd ask you to write down what you saw, in your own words, on the back of your program, and put the time on it and sign it. Nobody has to. If you don't want to, that's completely fine, and nobody's going to think anything of it." That last sentence is the whole reason it worked. He gave everybody an exit. 11 people wrote. An aunt of mine, 2 of Wes's co-workers who write patient care reports for a living, and whose statements were 4 times longer than anybody else's and included the lighting conditions. A woman from my office. A retired school teacher I'd met twice. The officiant. My cousin's husband. A neighbor of my father's from Poplar Street who has known him since 1988. Cal. My father's best friend since 1985. Brown tie. Same brown tie. He has worn a brown tie to every event I have ever attended. And Junie. My father stood there through all of it. That's the image I can't get rid of, not the slap. Him standing in the middle of the floor while 11 people around him bent over the backs of programs with the fern on the front and wrote in pen. Nobody yelled at him. Nobody threw him out. Somebody's kid was crying somewhere behind me. He said, once, "This is a family matter." And Cal, 68 years old, brown tie, 40 years, said, without looking up, "Warren, sit down." My father left about 6 minutes later, alone. He drove himself. We signed the marriage license at 20 minutes to 5 that afternoon in a side room with 2 witnesses and a bag of ice. And I have never regretted going through with it, and I never will. Here's what nobody tells you. On the Monday, I filed a complaint with the state board about the unauthorized use of my certification. By Thursday, there was a file open on me. Of course there was. Think about it from their side. There is a document in circulation supporting a $96 million loan. It says $6.3 million. It has my name, my license number, and my signature on it. The board does not know I didn't write it. All they know is that my name is on it, and I'm claiming it isn't mine, 9 days before I stood to benefit from a project my father was building. My license was suspended pending investigation on a Tuesday afternoon. 11 years. I want to be specific about what suspension means because it is not dramatic. It means you cannot accept an assignment. It means the bank you've worked for since 2016 sends a very kind email. It means 4 months with no income in a household with 1 paramedic's salary and a mortgage. I got a job at a garden center on Route 5 in March. $12 an hour. I loaded mulch into people's trunks. I want to say something that will sound strange. I liked it. Wet peat smell and old men asking me about tomatoes, and at 5:30 you go home and you are not carrying one single thing. I understood something about my own life that spring that 11 years of doing it properly had never taught me. The board's investigator was a woman named Prieto, very fair, completely unhurried. And she asked me one question in the second interview that I had been dreading since the day I filed. Miss Ferrell, in the last 5 years, have you ever performed an assignment involving a property with a connection to Ferrell Restoration? 26 months earlier, I had appraised a mixed-use building on Poplar Street for a credit union. 4 months after that, my father's company bought it. He did not know when I did the work. I did not know when I did the work. I found out when I saw the transfer. But I had known, on the day of the assignment, that my father had looked at that building. He'd mentioned it. And the rule is not disclose if it becomes a problem. The rule is disclose. I told the credit union's loan officer verbally, on the phone, in about 9 seconds. I did not put it in the file. The woman who trained me is named Odette Marsh. Everybody calls her Odie. She's 71, and she did this work for 41 years, and she signed off on my trainee hours in 2013. She drives a truck with 310,000 miles on it and a cracked dash she covers with a folded towel. She has told me twice that she is going to fix the dash. I went out there in April and sat in her kitchen and told her about the Poplar Street file. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I know. Roz, I reviewed 9 of your files in 2019 for the state's random pull. That was one of them. I saw the transfer, and I saw no disclosure memo in the work file." She looked at me steadily. "And I wrote it up as a documentation lapse, and I did not escalate it, because I've known you since you were 22, and because it was 9 seconds on a telephone, and because I did not think you were that." Odie. "So now they're going to depose me," she said, "and they're going to ask me if I've ever had a concern about your work files. And I have exactly one answer, and it isn't going to be no." I sat in a 71-year-old woman's kitchen and understood that the price of my father being held accountable was that the person who had protected me for 6 years was going to have to say so under oath. At 71. About a career she'd already finished. She got up and put the kettle on. "Don't you dare start apologizing," she said, with her back to me. "I made that choice in 2019 by myself. You want to be sorry about something, be sorry it took you 11 years to find out that a man will use your name if you let him leave it lying around." He asked to meet in June. Odie came with me, which was her idea, not mine. He'd lost weight. He had the pen. He clicked it 3 times before he said anything. And then my father made the best argument anybody has ever made to me. And I am going to give it to you in full, because if I trim it, I'm cheating. "You want to talk about my numbers," he said. "All right, let's talk about my numbers. In 2009, I had 41 people, framers, 2 crews of finish guys, an office. And there was no work. There was no work anywhere in this city for 18 months. And I went to a bank on Peach Street and I put a number in front of a man. And I told him what that block was going to be worth in 2014. And he did not believe me. I could see it on his face. He wrote the loan anyway, because I would not leave the office. That number was not supportable, Roz. You'd have written a different one. You'd have written a correct one, and it would have been correct. And those crews would have gone to Pittsburgh, or gone on unemployment, or gone on nothing. And I was right. In 2014, I was right. And that block is standing. And 41 people kept their houses." He put the pen down. "So don't sit there and lecture me about a document. I have been wrong on paper and right in the world. And you have never in your entire life had to find out which one you'd pick. Because I made sure you never had to. I didn't have anything. I want to be honest, I did not have anything. I have never made a payroll. I have never had 41 people whose mortgages depend on whether I am persuasive on a Tuesday." He was describing a moral universe I have been protected from my entire life. By him. on purpose. I sat there with a suspended license and a job at a garden center, and nothing at all to say to my father. And then Odie Marsh set down her cup. Warren. Odie, with respect, in 2009 you were right, and you got away with it. He stopped. That's the whole sentence. You were right, and you got away with it. And you have spent 16 years telling that story like it was a principle, when it was a coin toss that came up heads. She was not loud. She has never been loud in her life. I sat with the people the other side of that. 96, 97. I did the workouts. I appraised the ones that came back to the bank. And there is always a man in that story who was sure, Warren. Every single one of them was sure. That's not the rare part. Being sure is the cheapest thing there is. She pointed at the table between them. You want to hand that girl a coin and call it courage? No. My father looked at the window for a long time. He said, "It's the last thing I'm going to build." And Odie said, "I know it is. That's why you did it." That was the truest thing anybody said in the entire 14 months. And it came from a 71-year-old woman with a towel on her dashboard. And my father did not answer it. I need to tell you about the last week of June. The board process was going to take another 5 months minimum. The garden center was $12 an hour. The bank had reassigned my accounts. My insurer had sent a letter with the word rescission in it, which is the word that ends careers. And the project was dead in the water. And 41 people, different 41, but 41, were sitting. My father's lawyer sent a proposal. If I signed a statement saying that I had authorized revisions to the report through verbal communication and subsequently experienced a disagreement regarding scope, the company would withdraw its position. The board matter would likely resolve as a documentation dispute rather than a forgery. My license could come back in weeks instead of months. And, this was the part, Odie would not need to be deposed. It wasn't even a lie exactly. That's what made it work. It was a shape. It was $6.3 million all over again. I could see the argument. I could see how you'd get there. I had it open on my laptop at my kitchen table at 11 at night, and Wes was on a night shift and the house was completely quiet. And I want to tell you the truth about that night. I typed my name, full legal name, in the signature block in the little script font it defaults to. And I sat and I looked at it for, I don't know, long enough that the screen dimmed once and I moved the mouse to bring it back. 4 seconds is what it took me at the coffee table in October. This was not 4 seconds. What stopped me was not principle. I got up to get water. And on the counter, where it had been since March, was the folder with the 11 programs in it. And I thought about a 79-year-old woman on Wagner Avenue in February of 2021, whose husband had put in the kitchen floor in 1979. And I thought about the sentence, "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." And I understood, standing at my own sink at 11 at night, that I had said that sentence to approximately 2,000 people who had absolutely no power to make me say anything else. I had held the line every single time it cost them, and had never once been asked to hold it when it cost me. That's not integrity. That's just having the easy end of it for 11 years. I deleted my name. I did not feel noble. I felt sick. And I went to bed and I did not sleep, and Wes came home at 7 and I told him, and he said, "Okay," and made eggs. My sister is 30, Junie. She was communications director for Ferrell Restoration for 6 years. Her salary, her health insurance, the condo. The company held the note on the condo, which I did not know until April, and every professional relationship she had. All of it came through that office. For 4 months, she told everybody in that county that I was having a breakdown. She said it to our cousins. She said it at a chamber lunch. She said it to Wes's mother at a funeral in February, which I found out about a year later, and which I have decided not to bring up ever. And she had one of those programs in her purse the entire time. She called me in July and asked to meet at the Wegmans parking lot, which I want you to sit with, Because that is a 30-year-old woman who cannot be seen having coffee with her sister in her own town. She got in my car. She had a folder. He's putting the condo on the market, she said. Okay. I have 60 days. Junie, I'm at a garden center. I know. She was looking straight ahead. I'm not asking. We sat there for a while. A man loaded a case of water into a minivan. And then she opened her purse and took out a cream-colored program with a fern on the front, folded into quarters, soft at the creases, the way paper gets when it has been in a bag for a long time. She handed it to me without looking at me. It said, 3:04 in the afternoon. My father, Warren Ferrell, walked from the third row and struck my sister Roslyn open-handed across the left side of her face. Nobody said anything to him first. She said the word, no. I was 6 feet away. Juniper Ferrell. That's it. That's the whole thing. It's more precise than any of the other 10. I wrote it before I decided anything, she said. I wrote it because everybody else was writing and my hands were doing it. Junie. I've had it since October. She finally looked at me. I told the Ostranders you were having a breakdown in November with that in my purse. I want you to know I knew. I want you to know I wasn't confused. I knew every single day. I asked her why she was giving it to me now, and my sister said, because he told me last week that if I ever gave it to you, he'd know. And I realized he'd been able to say that to me for 9 months, and I never once wondered how he knew I had it. She figured it out in the car on the way over. He didn't know. He was guessing. He had been guessing for 9 months, and she'd been paying him for it the whole time. I used 9 of the 11. The 10th was Cal's. Cal Brennan is 68. He met my father in 1985 on a drywall crew. He was the best man at my parents' wedding. He taught me to drive a stick in a church parking lot in Harbor Creek because my father did not have the patience for it. He wrote his statement in October, 4 lines, brown tie. And in November, he called me. Roz, sweetheart. Hi, Cal. He was quiet for a bit. Cal is not a quiet man. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that I'll understand whatever you say. Okay. I'd like you not to use mine. I didn't say anything. I'm not taking it back. What I wrote is what happened, and I'll say it to anybody's face, including his. I'm asking you not to put it in the file. His voice did something. 40 years, honey. I don't have another 40. I'm not going to be able to fix it after. And I said, okay, Cal. I said okay in about a second and a half, and I have never been prouder of anything I've done. 9 statements were plenty. It was never close. Prieto told me later that 4 would have done it. Cal and my father have not spoken since a Thursday in December, because it came out anyway, not from me, from a cousin, that Cal had written one at all. In August, Cal had a stroke. He's all right. He's talking. He's got some weakness on the right side, and he gets tired. Everybody has told me those things aren't connected. His wife told me, my own husband told me, and he has been picking up stroke patients for 19 years, and he said, Roz, that's 40 years of blood pressure and a pack a day until 2011. I know that. I have not stopped thinking it anyway. And I am not going to sit here and tell you I've made peace with it, because I haven't, and I'd rather leave that in than take it out. There's one more thing, and it's about my marriage, and it isn't flattering to me. For about 6 weeks, I was furious with my husband. He asked 81 people for a pen before he asked me. He made a decision about my face and my father and the rest of my family's life, in a room I was standing in, without turning around and saying 2 words to me first. He was right. He was completely right. Without those 11 pieces of paper, the board matter is my word against my father's, and I lose it. And I know that. And I knew it in November. We had the fight in February. It was not a good fight. I said some things, and what he finally said was this. Roz, On a call, if I see an injury, I say the injury out loud. In the room. In front of the family. Every time. I know what you do for a living. You don't know why. He sat down on the edge of the bed. If I don't say it out loud in the room, it goes in the chart as fall. And then the next crew that comes to that house in 8 months reads fall. He looked at the floor. I've read fall about 400 times. Maybe 6 of those were falls. And then he said, and I should have asked you. Both things are true. I'm not going to pretend the first one cancels the second one. That is when I stopped being angry, and it was not because he explained himself. It was because he did not use being right as a way to not be sorry. I told him, you were right, and I needed 6 weeks to stop being furious with you, and I need you to let me have both of those at the same time. He said, yeah. That's the whole marriage, honestly. That's the whole thing. The board found that the certification had been affixed without my authorization to a materially altered report. My suspension was lifted in July, with no finding against me on the forgery. On the Parade Street file, I got a documentation citation, 4 hours of continuing education, and a letter in my permanent record. It is there forever, and it should be. Odie was deposed in May. 3.5 hours. She told the truth, including about 2019. And the board issued her a written advisory, at 71 years old, about a case she'd reviewed 6 years after she retired from reviewing. She has never once mentioned it to me. I mentioned it once. She said, Roslyn, I'd like a different subject. And that was the end of it. My father. No criminal charge. The district attorney looked at it and passed, and I understood the reasoning, and I was angrier about that than about the slap. What happened instead was slower and I think worse for him. The lender pulled Presque Point. Not because of the forgery in the end. Because once anybody looks hard at one document, they look at the other 40. The occupancy assumptions did not hold. The environmental line item that had been deleted from my report turned out to be about $1.4 million. And when it went back in, the whole thing stopped working. Presque Point is not built. That's the ending. There's still a chain across those 140 feet. Ferrell Restoration survived at about half its size. The Guarantee Building is still a hotel. The block on Poplar is still a block. Nothing he actually built came apart. He was charged with nothing, lost no house, and got to keep his life's work. He just doesn't get the last one. My sister lost the condo. She rented a place on the west side and took a job doing communications for a hospital system. And she was very bad at it for about 5 months, because she'd only ever worked for someone who told her what to think. She's good at it now. She has a boss who has never met our father. We are careful with each other. It isn't the way it was, and I don't think it's going back. Twice a month, in public, and we do not talk about him for the first 20 minutes, by an agreement neither of us has ever said out loud. I have her program in the folder with the other 10. I never filed it. I didn't need to. 9 was plenty, and I have never told her that, and I'm not going to. Because she needed to hand it over more than I needed to use it. He wrote to me in September, 1 page, and the first line was, I have started this 4 times, and every version begins by explaining. I'll give him that. That's a real sentence, and he found it himself. He wrote that he had treated Aunt Dee's land as his because it had been his sister's. He wrote that he had told his own staff to make Presque Point look easier to finance than it was, in those words. He wrote that hitting me was indefensible, and he used that word, and he did not put anything after it. And then, near the bottom, I do not think I taught you to lie. I think I taught you to see, and then I never taught you to stop, and then I was surprised when you looked at me. I read that about 9 times. We had lunch in November with Junie there. 3 conditions. Nothing about the land, nothing about my husband, nothing about whose fault anything was. He agreed to all 3, and he broke one of them, once, about 11 minutes in, and he caught himself doing it. He said, the only reason I even needed, and then he stopped. And he put his hand flat on the table, and he said, "No, that's the explaining." Junie and I looked at each other. An apology is information. It is not a reset button. He is not fixed, and he is 67 now, and I don't think men get fixed at 67. But he can catch himself in 11 minutes. And 18 months ago, he could not catch himself at all. I see him about every 6 weeks. It's smaller than what I had. It's the first honest thing either of us has ever had. My first assignment back was the second week of July. A house on Wagner Avenue. A woman named Delia, 77, whose husband had died in March. There was a calendar from a feed store on the wall that was still on April. I measured her rooms. I went in the basement with the flashlight. I sat down across from her at her kitchen table. I said the number, and she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she told me about the kitchen. Of course she did. There's always a kitchen. Hers was a back porch her husband had enclosed himself in 1986, and he'd done the wiring wrong and they'd had to have it redone. And she laughed about it. And then she didn't. So it's really only that. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry." And I did not change it. I drove home and I sat down and I wrote it up and I attached my certification. And the software made that little 2-note chime, the one I've heard 2,000 times. I put my hands flat on the desk and I cried for about a minute and a half. And then I sent it. There are 2 people I owe something honest to before I stop. And one of them is my father, and one of them is me. My father gave me the best thing I have. He stood me in a wrecked front room when I was 12 and taught me to see what something could become. And that is a rare and valuable and mostly good way to move through the world, and I would not give it back. He just never taught me the second half. He never said, "And then you go home and you write down what it is." I think a great many people are ruined by only ever being taught the half they were good at, and the thing he got wrong. For 34 years, my family's rule was that being sure was the same as being right. It isn't. Being sure is the cheapest thing there is. Everyone in every disaster was sure. My father was sure in 2009, and the coin came up heads, and he built a 16-year philosophy out of a coin toss. And then he asked me to flip it again, with 140 feet of his dead sister's land. And me. I want to be careful with this one. I did not do the brave thing. Not really. I said no to my father exactly once, out loud, in front of 81 people. And then I spent 14 months doing what I do at kitchen tables, which is just declining to change a number after somebody asks me to. I typed my own name into that settlement at 11 o'clock at night, and I looked at it long enough for the screen to dim. So when people tell me I was strong, what I actually think is, I had 11 years of practice saying, "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry," to people who couldn't make me do anything else. And then one time it cost me, and I barely held. Holding the line when it's free isn't character, it's just the job. You find out what you are the first time somebody asks you if you're sure, and the honest answer is expensive. So let me ask you honestly, and I want the real answer. If it were your father, 66 years old, the last thing he'll ever build, 41 people and 1 page, would you have signed it 3 weeks before the wedding and never found out about any of the rest? And the harder one, the one I still don't have an answer to, was I right to say okay to Cal? 9 was enough, and I knew it. But if it hadn't been enough, if it had come down to his statement or nothing, I don't know what I would have done to a 68-year-old man's last 40 years. Tell me, I read every one. Everything in this video is fictional, written for storytelling and reflection. If it reminded you of somebody, I hope it reminded you gently. You can love someone and admire what they built and still refuse to sign your name to it. The right people will ask if you're sure, and then they'll believe you the first time.